Hey there, tonight we're stepping into the muddy boots of a Napoleonic soldier, and trust me, it's going to be a reality check that'll make you grateful for every modern convenience you've ever taken for granted. We're not talking about the romanticized version you've seen in movies with their pristine uniforms and heroic charges. We're diving into the brutal, exhausting truth of what it actually meant to march across Europe in the early 1800s. If you're enjoying these deep dives into history's harsh realities, I'd really appreciate a quick like or subscribe. It helps more than you know, and I'm always curious where you're all listening from, so drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. It's amazing to think about people falling asleep to these stories all around the world. Now, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let your body settle into whatever you're lying on. We're about to transport you back to 1807, and by the time we're done, you'll understand exactly why the average person today wouldn't survive even a single day in Napoleon's Grande Armée. Congratulations! You've just been conscripted into Napoleon's army. The year is 1807, and you're standing in a muddy field somewhere in Prussia, watching your breath form clouds in the frigid morning air. The first thing that hits you isn't the sound of cannons or the sight of enemy forces. It's the smell. Thousands of unwashed men, rotting food, human waste, and the sweet stench of gangrene from untreated wounds creates an odor so thick you can taste it. Your uniform, if you can call it that, consists of rough wool that scratches against your skin like sandpaper. The fabric is already crawling with lice that you picked up from the previous owner. Some poor soul who didn't make it through the last campaign. Your boots, assuming you're lucky enough to have boots, are falling apart at the seams. Many of your fellow soldiers are marching barefoot, their feet wrapped in strips of cloth torn from the clothing of the dead. The weight on your back is crushing. Your musket alone weighs 11 pounds. But that's just the beginning. Add your bayonet, cartridge box with 60 rounds of ammunition, haversack stuffed with whatever food you could scavenge, water bottle that's more rust than metal, blanket, cooking pot and personal effects, and you're carrying close to 60 pounds of gear. That might not sound like much until you realize you'll be marching 25 miles today, in the rain, on an empty stomach. Speaking of your stomach, let's talk about food, or more accurately, the complete lack of it. The army's supply system is a joke. Your daily ration is supposed to include 1.5 pounds of bread, but you haven't seen proper bread in weeks. Instead, you get hard biscuits that are so tough they can break your teeth. These biscuits are infested with weevils, but you eat them anyway because protein is protein, and you're slowly starving to death. If you're extremely lucky, you might get a small portion of salted pork or beef that's been preserved in barrels for months. The meat is usually rancid, green around the edges, and tastes like it's been soaked in brine for decades. But you'll eat every scrap because you don't know when your next meal might come. Most days, you survive on whatever you can forage or steal from the countryside. Raw potatoes, moldy grain, sometimes nothing at all. Water is another constant nightmare. You drink from streams, puddles, wells that have been contaminated by corpses, and sometimes you're so desperate you'll drink your own urine. Dysentery is rampant, turning your intestines into liquid fire and leaving you weak and dehydrated. But you can't stop marching, because falling behind means death. Your muscles relax slightly as you imagine the sheer physical toll this would take on your modern body, accustomed to regular meals and clean water. The marching itself is torture beyond anything you can imagine. You wake up at 3 a.m. to the sound of drums beating assembly. There's no time for breakfast because there's no food anyway. You pack your meager belongings, shoulder your crushing load, and begin walking and walking and walking. through mud that sucks your boots off your feet, over rocky ground that tears your soles to shreds, up steep hills that leave you gasping for air, down into valleys where the cold settles like a living thing. The pace is relentless. Napoleon doesn't believe in rest days or easy marches. His armies are famous for their speed, covering distances that seem impossible. 30 miles in a day is considered normal. 40 miles isn't unheard of. Your feet develop blisters the size of coins that burst and bleed, soaking your socks in pus and blood. But you keep walking because the alternative is a bullet in the back from your own officers. Winter campaigns are particularly hellish. The cold penetrates your inadequate clothing and settles in your bones. Your fingers become so numb you can't load your musket. Your toes turn black with frostbite, and you watch them literally fall off. Men freeze to death while still walking, their bodies not discovered until they collapse face first in the snow. Sleep, when you can get it, happens on the ground. No tents, no shelter, just you, your thin blanket, and whatever protection you can find from the elements. You might curl up against a dead horse for warmth, or huddle with your fellow soldiers in a pile of human misery. The ground is frozen solid, rocky, or muddy, depending on the season. Every root, stone, and depression digs into your aching body. Your breathing naturally slows as you think about trying to rest in such conditions, your own comfortable bed feeling like an impossible luxury. Disease is your constant companion. Typhus spreads through the ranks like wildfire, carried by the lice that infest every piece of clothing. The fever burns through your body, while violent shivering racks your frame. Smallpox leaves survivors scarred and blind. Cholera empties your bowels until you're nothing but skin and bones. Pneumonia fills your lungs with fluid until every breath is a struggle. Medical care is virtually non-existent. The army surgeons are overworked, undertrained, and operating without anesthesia or understanding of infection. If you're shot, they'll dig the musket ball out with dirty fingers and maybe cauterize the wound with a red-hot iron. If you're lucky, they'll saw off a shattered limb without killing you in the process. Most wounded soldiers simply die where they fall, abandoned by their comrades who can't spare the time or energy to help. The psychological toll is perhaps worse than the physical suffering. You're surrounded by death constantly. Bodies line the roads where men have collapsed from exhaustion, disease, or starvation. After major battles, the fields are carpeted with corpses, some still moaning and begging for help that will never come. You step over the dead and dying without a second thought, because that's the only way to maintain your sanity. Your fellow soldiers aren't the noble comrades of war movies. They're desperate, half-mad men who will steal your food, your boots, your blanket while you sleep. Trust becomes a luxury you can't afford. Everyone is looking out for themselves because survival has been reduced to its most basic elements. The officers treat you like cattle. You're a number, a replaceable part in Napoleon's war machine. Discipline is maintained through brutal floggings, executions, and the constant threat of violence. Question an order, and you'll be shot as an example to others. Show weakness, and you'll be abandoned to die. The only thing that matters is your ability to march, fight, and die when commanded. A comfortable sigh escapes as you realize how different your world is from this nightmare of constant suffering and fear. Combat itself is a chaotic nightmare that bears no resemblance to the organized battles you've seen depicted in films. When the drums finally beat the advance, you're not marching in neat formations toward a clearly defined enemy. You're stumbling forward through smoke so thick you can't see 5 feet in front of you, your ears ringing from cannon fire. stepping over the mutilated remains of men who were talking to you just moments before. Your musket is a primitive weapon that takes nearly a minute to reload if you're skilled and not panicking. The smooth-bore barrel means accuracy is purely accidental beyond 50 yards. You fire in the general direction of the enemy and hope for the best. The black powder creates enormous clouds of smoke that obscure the battlefield, turning combat into a deadly game of blind man's bluff. The noise is overwhelming. Cannons boom like thunder, muskets crack incessantly, men scream in agony, officers bellow orders that no one can hear over the din. The sound alone is enough to drive men insane. Many soldiers stuff cloth in their ears, but it does little to muffle the constant barrage of noise that leaves your head pounding for days after each engagement. Bayonet charges are exercises in pure terror. You run toward enemy soldiers who are running toward you, both sides screaming to drown out their fear. The collision is brutal and personal. You're stabbing at faces, being stabbed at in return, slipping in blood and mud, wrestling for your life with men who are just as desperate to survive as you are. Most men never actually engage in hand-to-hand combat because one side usually breaks and runs before contact. But when it happens, it's savage beyond description. Artillery is the true killer on Napoleonic battlefields. Cannonballs don't just wound, they obliterate. A single round shot can take the heads off 3 men standing in a row. Grape shot turns human beings into scattered pieces of meat. You watch your friends disappear in explosions of blood and bone, reduced to unrecognizable fragments in an instant. The psychological effect is devastating as you realize that death can come at any moment, completely at random. Your muscles continue to relax as you process the absolute randomness of survival in such conditions. After battles, if you survive, there's no medical corps rushing to help the wounded. Injured men lay screaming on the field for hours or days until they die of blood loss, exposure, or are finished off by scavengers looking for valuables. You learn to ignore their cries because there's nothing you can do to help. And stopping to assist someone means potentially becoming a casualty yourself. The dead aren't buried with ceremony or dignity. Mass graves are dug when time permits, but often, bodies are simply left to rot where they fell. In winter, frozen corpses are stacked like cordwood. In summer, the stench of decomposition hangs over former battlefields for weeks. You become numb to the sight of human remains being picked apart by dogs, crows, and rats. Victory doesn't bring relief, only the prospect of more marching, more fighting, more dying. Defeat means retreat, which is often worse than advance, because you're moving away from supply lines while being harassed by enemy cavalry. Retreating armies leave trails of abandoned equipment, dying horses, and men too weak to continue. The weather is your enemy as much as any opposing army. Summer brings scorching heat that leaves you dehydrated and sunburned, your wool uniform trapping sweat against your skin until it chafes raw. Thunderstorms turn roads into rivers of mud that suck at your feet with every step. Winter brings killing cold that freezes your water bottle solid and makes your musket too cold to hold with bare hands. Rain is particularly miserable because you have no way to dry your clothing once it gets wet. You march in soaked wool that weighs twice as much as when dry, chafing against your skin and breeding infections. Your gunpowder gets damp and won't fire properly. Your food, what little you have, becomes a soggy mess that's even less appetizing than usual. Equipment maintenance is a constant battle against entropy. Your musket rusts if you don't clean it daily, but you rarely have proper cleaning supplies. Your boots fall apart and must be cobbled back together with whatever materials you can find. Your uniform tears and is patched with scraps from dead soldiers' clothing until it resembles a patchwork quilt more than military attire. Personal hygiene becomes impossible. You haven't bathed in months, and neither has anyone else. Your hair is matted with dirt, grease, and lice. Your teeth are rotting from malnutrition and lack of care. Open sores cover your body from constant chafing and minor infections. The smell emanating from your own body becomes so overwhelming that you stop noticing it, though it would make your modern self vomit immediately. Your breathing deepens as you imagine trying to maintain any sense of human dignity under such conditions. The psychological toll extends beyond the immediate horrors of combat and suffering. You're cut off from home, family, and everything familiar. Letters from loved ones are rare and often months old by the time they reach you. Many soldiers never learn if their families are alive or dead, living in constant uncertainty about the people they're supposedly fighting to protect. Homesickness becomes a physical ache that never goes away. You dream about your mother's cooking, your warm bed, the simple pleasure of a clean shirt. These memories become more precious than gold because they're all you have left of the world you once knew. Some men go mad from the isolation and despair, talking to invisible family members or retreating into catatonic states. The camaraderie that supposedly develops between soldiers is largely a myth born of necessity rather than genuine affection. You stick together because isolated individuals die faster, but trust is limited. Men will steal from their own comrades, abandon wounded friends, and inform on each other to officers if it means better treatment or extra rations. Religion becomes either a desperate comfort or is abandoned entirely. Some soldiers pray constantly, clutching religious medallions and reciting prayers they learned as children. Others lose their faith completely when confronted with the seemingly endless capacity for human suffering and cruelty. Chaplains are rare, and those who serve often become as brutalized as the men they're supposed to comfort. Your shoulders naturally drop as you release tension, grateful for the peace and security of your current environment. The concept of time becomes distorted during campaigns. Days blur together in endless cycles of marching, fighting, and surviving. Seasons pass unnoticed, except for their effect on your immediate suffering. You lose track of dates, months, even years. The only calendar that matters is the rhythm of hunger, exhaustion, and fear. Entertainment is virtually non-existent. There are no books, no games, no music except for the occasional fife and drum. Conversations revolve around food, home, and speculation about when the suffering might end. Some men tell stories or sing songs from memory, but even these simple pleasures become rare as exhaustion and despair take hold. The hierarchy of the army creates its own special miseries. Officers live better than enlisted men, but they're still subject to the same diseases, weather, and enemy fire. Non-commissioned officers are caught between their superiors' demands and their men's desperation, often becoming targets of resentment from both directions. Everyone is trapped in a system that values obedience above survival and glory above humanity. Promotion rarely comes through merit, but through the death of superiors. You might advance in rank simply because everyone above you has been killed, not because you've demonstrated any particular skill or leadership ability. This creates a perverse incentive structure, where survival sometimes depends on the deaths of your own comrades. Desertion becomes a constant temptation, but it's not the escape route it appears to be. Military justice is swift and brutal. Deserters who are caught face execution by firing squad, often carried out by their former comrades. Even if you escape immediate capture, you're now a fugitive in hostile territory with no money, no food, and no shelter. Local populations rarely help deserters, either from loyalty to their own armies or fear of retaliation. The few deserters who manage to disappear often die anyway from exposure, starvation, or disease. Those who make it back to civilization find themselves outcasts, unable to return home because they're marked as cowards and criminals. Military police actively hunt deserters, and the punishment extends to family members who might be harboring fugitives. Your breathing becomes more relaxed as you consider how different concepts of duty and choice are in your modern world. Communication with the outside world is nearly impossible. There's no postal system for common soldiers, no way to send word to family about your condition or location. Information travels at the speed of horseback, and most news you receive is weeks or months out of date. You might learn about major political developments long after they've affected your situation, fighting battles for causes that have already been abandoned or resolved. The isolation is psychological torture. You exist in a bubble of immediate survival with no connection to the larger world beyond the army. This disconnection from normal human society contributes to the brutalization of soldiers who gradually lose touch with civilian values and morality. Money becomes meaningless in this environment. Soldiers are rarely paid, and when they are, it's often in currency that's worthless in the territories you're fighting through. Barter systems develop around necessities like food, dry clothing, and ammunition. A pair of decent boots might be worth more than a month's wages, assuming you ever see those wages. Looting becomes a survival necessity rather than a moral choice. After battles, soldiers strip the dead of anything useful, regardless of which side they fought for. Civilian populations are systematically robbed of food, clothing, and valuables by armies that can't supply themselves through official channels. This creates a cycle of hatred between military forces and local populations that makes every interaction potentially lethal. The legal system within the army is designed to maintain discipline through fear rather than justice. Courts-martial are swift affairs where the outcome is usually predetermined. Punishments range from flogging that can kill a man to summary execution for relatively minor offences. There's no appeal process, no legal representation, and no consideration of circumstances. Punishments are carried out publicly to terrorise other soldiers into compliance. You're forced to watch your comrades being whipped until their backs are shredded meat, or shot for crimes as minor as talking back to an officer. These spectacles are designed to break your spirit and remind you that you're property of the state, not a human being with rights. Your muscles continue melting into relaxation as you appreciate the legal protections and human rights you enjoy today. The concept of leave or furlough is fantasy for common soldiers. You enlist for the duration of the war with no defined end date. Some conflicts drag on for years or even decades, meaning you might spend the majority of your adult life in military service. There's no rotation system, no rest periods, no time to recover physically or psychologically from the constant stress. Veterans who survive long enough to be discharged often find themselves completely unable to readjust to civilian life. Years of brutalization have left them mentally shattered, physically broken, and socially isolated. Many become beggars or criminals because they lack the skills or mental stability to hold regular employment. The skills you learn as a soldier have little application in peaceful society. Knowing how to load a musket under fire or march 30 miles while carrying 60 pounds of equipment doesn't translate into useful civilian occupations. Most ex-soldiers die young from injuries, diseases, or complications related to their military service. Relationships with civilians become impossible to maintain. The experiences you've endured are so far outside normal human experience that you can't communicate them to people who haven't shared them. The violence, suffering, and moral compromises necessary for survival create a gulf between you and peaceful society that can never be bridged. Marriage and family life become distant memories or impossible dreams. Even if you survive and return home, the person who comes back bears little resemblance to the man who left. Physical disabilities, psychological trauma, and years of separation make resuming normal relationships extremely difficult. Women in military camps exist in particularly precarious situations. Camp followers include wives, prostitutes, laundresses, and other support personnel who provide essential services but have no official protection. They're subject to violence, exploitation, and abandonment whenever the army moves. Their children often die from the same diseases and malnutrition that kill soldiers. Your body feels heavy and comfortable now as you sink deeper into your warm, safe bed, grateful for the stability and security of modern life. The propaganda that recruits soldiers bears no resemblance to military reality. Promises of glory, honor, and patriotic service evaporate quickly when confronted with the daily struggle for survival. The noble cause you thought you were fighting for becomes irrelevant when you're focused entirely on finding your next meal or surviving the next march. Political objectives change frequently, but soldiers are rarely informed of these shifts. You might spend months fighting for territory that's subsequently abandoned for diplomatic reasons you'll never understand. The sacrifices you've made and friends you've lost become meaningless casualties of political maneuvering conducted by people who will never face the consequences of their decisions. The romantic notion of military brotherhood is replaced by the harsh reality of competition for limited resources. While soldiers do sometimes help each other, these relationships are primarily transactional. You share food with someone because you might need their help tomorrow, not from genuine affection or loyalty. Command structure becomes increasingly dysfunctional as campaigns drag on. Officers die from disease and combat, leaving inexperienced replacements who lack the knowledge to keep their men alive. Orders often contradict previous instructions or ignore local conditions, forcing soldiers to choose between obedience and survival. The supply chain that's supposed to sustain the army breaks down regularly. Wagons get stuck in mud, supply depots are captured by enemies, and corruption diverts resources away from frontline troops. You learn not to depend on official channels for anything essential to your survival. Intelligence about enemy movements is often inaccurate or completely fabricated. You might march for days to engage an enemy force that doesn't exist, or walk into ambushes because reconnaissance failed to detect threats. The fog of war isn't just a metaphor, it's the daily reality of operating with incomplete and unreliable information. Your breathing has become slow and steady as you process the overwhelming complexity of surviving in such a chaotic environment. Technology that might improve conditions develops slowly and reaches common soldiers last, if at all. New weapons, better equipment, and medical advances are reserved for elite units or officers. You continue using obsolete, unreliable equipment while knowing that better alternatives exist but remain out of reach. The environmental destruction caused by armies leaves lasting scars on the landscape and local populations. Forests are cleared for fuel and construction materials. Fields are trampled by thousands of marching feet, and water sources are contaminated by human and animal waste. This ecological damage persists long after the armies have moved on, affecting civilian populations for years. Record keeping is haphazard at best, meaning your service, injuries, and sacrifices may never be officially documented. If you die, there might be no record of your death, no notification to your family, and no grave marker to indicate where you fell. you could simply disappear from history as if you never existed. The transition from civilian to soldier involves abandoning most of what makes you human. Compassion becomes a liability when resources are scarce. Honesty is dangerous when survival depends on deception. Normal moral codes must be suspended to function in an environment where killing is routine and stealing is necessary. Yet somehow, in this environment of unimaginable hardship, some men do survive. They adapt to conditions that would break most people, develop skills that seem impossible, and maintain enough humanity to eventually return to peaceful life. But these survivors represent a tiny fraction of those who march off to war, and their success comes at costs that can never be fully calculated or repaid. The lucky few who live through campaigns carry scars both visible and hidden for the rest of their lives. Their survival stories become the legends that inspire future generations to repeat the cycle, perpetuating the myth that military service is glorious rather than the grinding horror it actually represents for most participants. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep in your comfortable bed, surrounded by the safety and security that countless generations died to provide, remember that the price of the peaceful world you inhabit was paid by men who endured conditions beyond your worst nightmares. Their sacrifice wasn't glorious or romantic. It was brutal, thankless, and largely forgotten. But it was real, and it shaped the world you now call home. As you settle deeper into your warm, comfortable bed tonight, take a moment to appreciate the extraordinary luxury of your existence. The clean sheets beneath you, the roof over your head, the knowledge that tomorrow you'll wake up to food, clean water, and safety. These aren't just conveniences, they're miracles that millions of Napoleonic soldiers could never have imagined. We've journeyed through the harsh reality of what it meant to march with Napoleon's armies, from the crushing weight of equipment and constant hunger to the psychological trauma of endless warfare. We've seen how disease, exhaustion, and brutality shaped every moment of a soldier's existence, transforming ordinary men into hollow survivors of an experience that defied human endurance. The next time you complain about a long walk, a missed meal, or sleeping on an uncomfortable mattress, remember those men stumbling through European mud with infected wounds, eating weevil-infested biscuits, and dreaming of the simple comfort of a dry place to sleep. Their suffering wasn't noble or glorious, it was grinding, desperate, and largely forgotten. Your eyelids are growing heavy now as you drift toward peaceful sleep, protected by centuries of progress that separated you from that world of constant struggle. Rest well, knowing that the very act of sleeping safely through the night is a privilege those soldiers would have considered an impossible dream. Sweet dreams, and thank you for taking this journey through history's harsh realities with me tonight.